It's a privilege to have you with us today, Arpita.
Thank you so much, Lennon. This has been a great honor for me to sit through these sessions, and I think it's been very, very enlightening. So my name is Arpita Khadria, and I am the founder and CEO of Barefoot Consultancy. We are a boutique brand consultancy based out of Bangalore, and for the last 8 years, we have been serving small, mid-size, and large brands, to get bigger and better. So it's been a very satisfying journey for me, because I've been both on the advertising side as well as the brand manager side, and to now help brands, is really a privilege. So my topic for today, as you all know, is brand strategy to rebuild value post the pandemic, right? So let me start by sharing a quote that one of the MDs of a billion-dollar company said to me, very jokingly. He said, 3 months ago, I did not know there was a word pandemic, right? So this really summarizes the shock value that this particular event has brought to the world. We all know that some of the biggest brands have actually filed for bankruptcy during this time, right? For some reason, my slide is not moving. Yeah, okay. These are some of the big brands, like Gold's Gym, JCPenney. We all know these brands. Neiman Marcus, they have filed for bankruptcy thanks to the pandemic. So there's no taking away from the shock value and the disaster that we're looking at. But having said that, we marketers obviously have to be the eternal optimists, right? So let me give you another perspective. While those were some of the brands that have filed for bankruptcy during the pandemic, these are entire product categories that were rendered redundant thanks to innovation, right? So the point I'm trying to make is business is a churn. And much like in the book written by Simon Sinek, which is called The Infinite Game, that's really how businesses work. What he mentions in the book is infinite companies are built for resilience. Finite companies are built for stability. Now, I really like this because the word stability inherently means staying pretty much the same, right? Whereas resilience, if you look at the definition of resilience, there's one definition which says able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. But I like the second definition, which says able to recoil or spring back into shape after bending, stretching, or being compressed. I mean, I like this definition more simply because there are so many businesses today who are either feeling stretched or bent or compressed, right? So that feeling is very relatable. And what the word resilience means is exactly that, right? And the funny thing is, in December 2019, I had written an article where I had predicted the top 5 industries for the next decade. And if you look at that list, it goes like this, IT and IoT, e-learning, children-centric businesses, healthcare and fitness, and travel and hospitality. So when I look back at this list, honestly, it's just the travel and hospitality industry that has really taken a big hit, but every other industry actually has seen a bigger surge. So the argument that now COVID is pushing us to digital, or forcing us to digital is not really true. I think the shift to digital was already happening. What COVID has done is expedited that whole thing. And this is not to simplify the crisis, mind you. I'm not saying this to simplify the crisis, but I'm just trying to give all of us a perspective of how businesses function inherently through generations. And since my topic is about what businesses and brands should do in the future, and since I'm also an entrepreneur, not just a brand expert, I believe there are 3 questions that brands need to ask themselves for the future. Brands must ask, am I still relevant? Number 1. Am I still relatable? Number 3, am I still accessible? Let me explain these 3 questions and these points a little bit further. When I say relevance, what am I talking about? I'm talking about asking yourself whether your product or service is still of use to people, at a time like this or even in the future. Or maybe look at your process, internal processes, or even the people and the positions that you have in the company. Does it need a rejig? Is it something that is still relevant? Number two, relatability. Relatability is all about the communication, the positioning, the messaging, because brands cannot ignore that, right? I mean, that is really where the proof of the pudding lies. And thirdly, the accessibility. We all know that social distancing has obviously led to an issue of accessibility. So that is the third point, an area of focus that brands need to ask themselves. And this could relate to your supply chain, the distribution channels, and even pricing, whether it's still accessible, your pricing is still accessible, or you need to relook at it. One of the ways to simplify this entire approach is to look at our brand resilience model, right? So we have actually simplified this concept and called it Barefoot's Brand Resilience Model. How it really works is, so you have these three questions, as brands we need to ask. And let me explain this a little bit. So let's say that you are a brand that is relevant even now and is relatable as well, but not accessible, right? One example of something like this could be maybe, salons, right? Or spa service, salon services, or even restaurant services. Food is something that's relevant, and even the communication could be relatable, but simply because of the lockdown, you're not able to access. So the thing to do there is to actually look at reach, right? How to really make sure that you're able to reach clients. The second situation could be that you are relevant, you are accessible, but you're not relatable. In that case, you need to look at maybe repositioning. By this, I don't really mean relook at your philosophy and your ethos and your values. No, I'm talking about your messaging and your campaign, right? So because emotions are running high at a time like this, and maybe I was a very optimistic person in normal times, but right now I'm feeling very pessimistic. So the way brands have to function, needs to be relooked at. If you are relevant and accessible, but not relatable. Third situation, suppose you're relatable and you're accessible, but not relevant at all, which could be like, say, an event management company, right? What is it that brands need to do then? You need to pivot, right? So I will spend more time on all these scenarios subsequently in the presentation. Let me start with the first question, which is, am I still relevant, right? Jack Ma said that if you can stay alive, then you would have made a profit already, right? He said this is the message to businesses today. And if you look at the model where I'm talking about relevance, it is basically a point where businesses have to become resilient and look to make fundamental changes if they find themselves not relevant to the current conditions and situation, right? One good example of this is Victorinox. So, the CEO of Victorinox said, we don't think in quarters, we think in generations. And I find this extremely profound because Victorinox was a very popular gifting item, especially their knives, right? The Victorinox Swiss knife was a very popular gifting item. And 80% of their revenues came from knives before 9/11. After 9/11, you were not allowed to carry knives in the hand baggage, right? So can you imagine, overnight, this brand had to pivot. And how is that any less than a COVID for a Victorinox? Think about it. But the brand invested in R&D, actually reduced its dependency on knives, and today they have less than 35% of their revenues coming from knives. And it has truly reinvented itself. It has shown resilience, right? There are many other examples even that you can see in current scenario where luxury brands like Lamborghini has pivoted by using the upholstery division to make masks and even ventilator parts, right? Similarly, Nike has done the same, has looked at making face shields with their sole materials. And I think these are very powerful examples, of brands that are finding themselves a little irrelevant in today's scenario. Now you might say that, Arpita, all this is very well, that these are all international examples. What about, India? Now, I actually conducted interviews with the top CEOs and MDs of our country, both small, medium, and large companies. You had the MD of Titan in that, you had the MD of Century Ply, but you also had the MD of, a startup like Licious, or a small company, social enterprise like Go Desi. So it was a mixed bag. And in that series, it was called No Right Answers. You guys can check those videos out. I'm sure it'll be very helpful to everybody. It's on YouTube. It's also on our website, Barefoot website. There were 5 key takeaways in those sessions, and I will summarize that for you so that you understand how to stay relevant, right? And these might sound really simple, but actually these are very, very profound. Number 1, health. And by health, I mean mental and physical health, both of the top management and employees and all stakeholders. So the brand really has to focus on this. And I remember during the interview with the MD of Titan, which is a billion-dollar company, he said that we are going to encourage employees to have a life outside of work. It's very important in times like these that you have an interest outside of work to keep healthy mentally and physically. Second, and without this, brands cannot flourish, according to him, because without good health, you cannot innovate. You have to be mentally fit, nimble, extremely on top of your game to innovate. And necessity is the mother of all inventions, as we know. So this is the time where we can actually look for blind spots. We can completely think out of the box, and get out of our comfort zones, they said. Third, productivity. Everybody has to embrace digital ways of working. Time will become money, and you have to look to enhance your skills as an individual. If you were doing XYZ job, you need to maybe do another set of things, because there will be layoffs. There's no denying that. So maybe one person has to do 2 different things in order to stay relevant. Fourth is of course very, very important, the attitude and agility that the brand shows, and I will speak about that more later, which will be covered in the communication, right? Finally, sustainability. This was one big point that came up during my interviews with these gentlemen and women, where they said that we have to, as brands, become kinder to the planet, kinder to each other, and you promote local manufacturers, vendors very, very seriously. So these were the 5 key takeaways from that session. And one big, change that they see coming through this is collaborate, not compete. They said that maybe it's time for even the big brands to collaborate and not necessarily compete. And I think that's very, very profound, right? And you are seeing that already. There are so many brands that are coming together to do this. So that was on the relevance part. Now coming to the relatability part, right? Piyush Pandey said, products are made in factories, brands are made in hearts of people. And if that is true, you need to communicate. You cannot go silent. And I think every speaker before me has said this, that brands cannot go silent. I have always maintained that brands are exactly like people, right? They walk like they walk, they have a way to walk, they have a way to talk, they have a way to behave. And if that is the case, imagine you are going through something and someone close to you stops communicating with you, right? So obviously it's not going to get you out of that situation. Brands have to invest in communicating to their stakeholders. And mind you, it's not just customers I'm talking about here. And why am I saying that? I'm saying that because unlike a recession, this is first a human crisis and then an economic crisis. So in my mind, this is very different from a recession, right? It will lead to a recession, yes. But for me, first, a human crisis means that brands need to humanize themselves. We cannot become all about, revenues, top lines, balance sheets. We need to humanize ourselves, right? What does that mean? It means thinking about how customers are feeling, not just what they want to buy, right? It's about basically psychological, as Rory Sutherland says, right? This is really sitting at the heart of this crisis, which is behavioral insights and emotions will take center stage going forward. And maybe that's one of the reasons why McDonald's has brought back the CMO role, which they had scrapped last year. I'm sure the brand has realized that it is the marketing initiatives that will actually bring them out of this crisis. And this is a very profound thing for me to say, isn't it? Because the first reaction that everybody has is to cut marketing expenses and put that on the back burner. So when I look at the model again, when I look at the brand resilience model, and if you are sitting as a brand, you can ask yourself, am I sitting somewhere where I'm relevant, I'm accessible, but I'm not relatable in the current scenario? You need to reposition. I think one good example from the recent occurrence in India was that of Kent. So let me quickly explain this example. Kent launched a dough maker, right? And it was an extremely relevant product because during lockdown, I think all of us struggled to make dough, right? If you have more than 4 people in the family, it's an absolute struggle. So it was a very relevant product. Accessibility was also there. But how did they position it? This is what they wrote. They said, are you allowing your maid to knead atta dough by hand? Her hands may be infected. Do not compromise on health and purity. Now, this got a lot of flack on social media, and everybody was up in arms against this campaign, so much so that the brand had to take it down and even apologize, right? Why did this happen? We all need to ask ourselves, right? I think it's because we are in a place where we need to avoid negative emotions as a brand because there's enough negativity out there already. Advertising has immense power to lead society in a particular direction, and if even if it functions in its own self-interest of creating demand, it needs to stay away from negative emotions. I mean, if I was to do that ad, it was a lost opportunity in my mind. Kent could have sold millions, without getting bad publicity. I would have kept it very, very positive. I would have said, spouse wants, bread and daughter wants roti, no problem, bring it on. Like this can do both. So something to that effect would have really been very, very helpful. One way to understand this better is the Kubler-Ross model, right? We as humans go through certain stages psychologically to handle change or tragedy or a big disaster. And those stages go like this: denial, anger, depression, bargain, acceptance. Now, if this is something to go by, I think brands really need to be on top of their game to understand where their customer base is in terms of the mental stage. And hence, you have to have stages in communication. So if your audience is in denial, like maybe at the start of the lockdown, people were in denial, the job of the brand should be to inform, to educate. When they're angry, they're feeling anxious, you have to reassure, you have to unite. In the depression stage, listen more, engage more, right? So that they don't feel alone. And finally, acceptance, that's when you can start talking about growing, inspiring, right? Spending more, indulging, all of those emotions. So being on top of that, on top of these psychological stages is extremely important for brands to hit the nail on the head. So you need to understand where exactly you stand and where exactly your audience stands. So in short, we have to play the shrink right now. There's a lot of muddled thoughts that everybody has, everyone's confused, there's uncertainty. Uncertainty always leads to that. And the job of the brand is to actually unclutter the mind, not create more divide and negative feelings and fear, psychosis. One way to do that maybe is humor, right? I love this packaging design. It says, keep your hands clean and your mind dirty. Humor, obviously, is a great tool to build trust. Many people don't know this, but it is a great tool to build trust. But having said that, of course, this will be a very cultural decision. I think depending on which geographical region you are in, you can decide whether it is going to work or not, but certainly an option to lighten the mood. Finally, accessibility, right? Bob Marley, the great Bob Marley said, don't live for your presence to be noticed, but for your absence to be felt. Frankly, this is absolute gibberish at a time like this because it's going to be a musical chairs out there. Okay, loyalty will be an all-time low, and we have to make sure that the brand that you are selling is available. simply because the behavior has changed, right? I mean, if I'm going to a grocery store, I have made a list and I want to avoid going to the store again and again, right? I'm going to go there. I want a bottle of ketchup. If I have the brand, if the brand I want is available, great. Otherwise, I'm going to switch. I'm not going to keep waiting for that brand to appear, right? So hence, I think it's very, very important to have that in place, which is why if you look at the brand resilience model again, it is the reach that takes center stage when you're not accessible. One of the great examples of this is BMW. They have gone completely contactless. Now they had, I think, contactless customization, but now even the sale is contactless. I think Gabriella mentioned about Tata Motors as well. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of brands are doing this, and it's a great thing. There's nothing wrong with it. I welcome it, But accessibility will not just be about contactless ideas. If you ask me, it's going to be more about behavioral economics. I think this is what brands have to start taking very, very seriously. One of the good examples that I would like to share with you here is a store in Denmark had priced one bottle of sanitizer at $10 and had priced the second bottle, if you buy the second bottle, at $100. Now, doesn't that sound just crazy? I mean, it should be the other way around normally, right? So if you buy two, you get it for lesser. But they did this because people were hoarding. And the brand wanted to discourage hoarding, that everybody should get a chance to buy a bottle. And I thought this was fantastic because this is really the kind of innovation we need, which factors in behavior, emotions, as well as economics. One more really good example that's coming to my mind is that of Zomato, which is a food delivery app here in India. While many apps are asking for donations for their delivery people, if you notice when you place an order, it says 10 rupees for our delivery person. What Zomato has done is taken it a step further in terms of behavioral economics and actually worked on the last mile, what we call in our technical terms the last mile, right? Which is it actually shows you a food item next to the amount that you're paying. So it says 10 rupees a biscuit, right? 15 rupees a cup of tea, 20 rupees, something else. So what that makes a piece of cake. So what that makes you do is you tend to give more, right? Because it's giving you that behavioral, emotional cue, and that is really what is going to start differentiating brands from the others. It's not just simple pricing strategy that's going to work going forward. Yeah. So, like I mentioned, behavioral sciences will become extremely key going forward. And like Flavella mentioned, that I think quick customer response and mining your existing customer base is your low-hanging fruit. You have to mine your existing customer base, and they are already loyal to you. So probably keep your communication line open with them. Do not disappear on them. So to summarize, the Barefoot's brand resilience model allows you to look at your business and ask these three questions. And if the answer to that is yes, you have made it. And you are a resilient company and a resilient brand. Let me end with a quote from the famous Rocky. You, me, or nobody is going to hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. Thank you.
Thank you, Arpita. That happens to be one of my favorite movie. I love that movie. I love that quote. Thank you for bringing that here. Because that's certainly pretty inspirational and very inspired by the fact that we were able to tie it up with what the message that you had for us. So we have a comment for you from Pulok, who says, excellent coverage, brilliantly presented, relevant examples. Thank you for your effort. So we're already getting praises for the presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
So that was fascinating. It's interesting to see about how there's a common trend in almost all our speakers today about how brand has to build an emotional connect with people. It's not about just buying or selling as the main idea. It's about building relationship, an acknowledgement of the other human being. So, which is really fascinating. And I think that is something that every major company should focus on right now, not just on buying and selling, but especially on building strong human relationships, strong human contacts. So I have a few questions while we wait for more questions from the audience now. Participants, it's open questions from you. You can ask us questions. But while we wait for some questions from participants, I have a couple of things I want to ask. One is regarding the resilience model. It's pretty interesting. It's very comprehensive. At the same time, it's unique. I don't think I have come across anything of this, anything like this before. Can you tell me how you came up with this and what was the vision that kind of drove you to come up with this model?
Well, I think all the gray hair on my head will tell you how. I've been in the industry for 15 plus years. And of course, you know, you see, like I started my presentation by saying that a churn is the inevitable in business, right? And the more prepared you are for a rainy day, the better the chances of overcoming a scenario like this. Of course, I also have read books on these things, and you know, you tend to take ideas from your experiences, what you read, and of course your own thoughts, and that's really how it came about. And the magic of it is in summarizing and structuring it in a simple way so that even entrepreneurs you know, can relate to it. My biggest concern is that we consultants tend to become very elitist, and that's really why I started Barefoot, because I didn't want it to be an elitist concept. I wanted consultancy to be understood by everybody and be able to apply it. So the whole effort was to actually crystallize it to a very simple model which people can look at and say, okay, you know what, where do I stand in the scheme of things, and hence what do I need to do? And of course then you deep dive into your resources, your target audience. Like Flavella very rightly said, that you have to understand what your segment is feeling, and then accordingly decide on the action plan.
Fair enough, right. You are writing a book on behavioral economics right now.
Yes, yes. I don't ask me when it's going to finish. I have no idea.
But it's a very important subject, and I think a very important addition to brand communication efforts. I do remember reading a book on nudge theory about how nudging is an important aspect of behavioral economics. Would you like to kind of talk about how nudging, if you wish to, is also something that brand communications can consider?
No, in fact, like I said, you know, while many brands have ignored these things for a while now, I think COVID will push people to look at behavioral sciences and behavioral economics. There is no avoiding it anymore, especially if you want to not perish. I would go to the extent to say that you have to appreciate the science and psychology to be more effective, right? We all know the whole Cambridge Analytica scenario, right? Everybody, the reason why they were so effective is because they were digging into your psychology. The ethics part aside, right? But when you look at behavior, I mean, I'll give you an example, okay? Currently, if you see how resorts and lodges are really promoting themselves, some of them have opened up, right? And they're saying few things. One is that we're operating at 50% capacity. Second is, you know, we check temperature on check-in. Go a step further, okay? Here's just some food for thought. Go a step further. Don't say you're operating at 50% capacity. Say you are not allowing room sharing unless it's family. Go one step further, because if you're allowing 3 people to share who are strangers, it doesn't make any sense. Second, if you're checking temperature just on check-in, right? And I'm at this, say, Safari Lodge, and I'm there for 5 days, I'm feeling relaxed. Third day, I will forget all about COVID. We are social beings, you know, we tend to go back to our to the behavior that's convenient to us. And if we don't have behavioral sciences and psychology inbuilt into our policies as brands, we will create bigger issues. So what if they check temperature every day, right? So this is just an example to tell you how behavioral economics and psychology can really be more effective, right? So if they check temperature every day, everybody will know, all the guests will know that, you know what, they're going to check. So I better wear the mask. I better be careful in common areas. Just an example.
Right.
Explain. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I have one more question because this whole subject of behavioral science is something which I think is extremely vital. The second question I have is consumer behavior is an important aspect of behavioral science. I think behavioral science kind of defines how consumer behavior is changing. Considering the post-COVID situation which we are all walking towards, how do you see consumer behavior largely changing?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's exactly. Sorry?
What are your predictions? Do you have any special predictions about how consumer behavior will change?
Yeah. So I think, rationality, while it's going to be a tough task to really pin the behavioral, trends, because on one side, you will see price consciousness, which, you seem to think is a rational thing to do mentally. And on another side, you will see us very, very emotional and possibly willing to spend maybe a large amount on just maybe getting a massage. So I'm just trying to tell you that we ourselves are confused right now as consumers, right? We don't know how we're feeling, and because of the uncertainty of it all. And which is why I've constantly said that this is slightly different from a recession, right? In a recession, it's slightly more certain because it's more a waiting game in a recession. Here, it is firstly completely against us as beings. We are social beings. Second is there is no end date to this, and there is no certain way of actually finding solutions. Correct? So it's hence one has to constantly communicate. Unless you communicate, you will not get feelers of where the consumer behavior is headed. But we can, as brands, play a very conscious role in creating that positive environment, not to mislead, not to fuel the fire, not to divide us further, like many speakers have said in the previous presentation. It's very, very key. You can't undermine the importance of that, because, like I said, movies, celebrities, advertising, these are big influencers in our societies. And what they say, how they say it, really sets the tone for the rest of the country or the world. So we have a responsibility. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. We do have a responsibility. And in one way, you clearly explained that probably consumer behavior is, the market is a bit blind when it comes to changing human behavior, consumer behavior in the present COVID-19 scenario.
Yeah.
Which means we need to do a lot more research and a lot more survey. The brands need to be more open, learning and listening to consumers to understand how to interact with them better.
Yeah, of course. In fact, if you look at the Kubler-Ross model, it also says that you need not move from one stage to the next. You could move backwards also. As people, we could even move backwards. So that's what's happening in America, perhaps, right? They were moving towards maybe an acceptance stage, perhaps, I don't know, or a bargain stage. But now they're again back to being angry, right? There are certain stages where the model says you can even go backwards. So it is the brands that need to constantly be in touch. If you go silent, you will be lost. And then there'll be a cascading effect of being irrelevant. Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you so much, Arpita. That was
very so much.
You answered all our questions and you really helped us understand a major part about behavioral science, which I think is very, very important when it comes to branding in the future, at least considering the post-COVID situation. Thank you so much for your time, Arpita. It was an absolute honor.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for your time. And you could find me on LinkedIn, and our website has all the videos of all the interviews that I have taken with the top management of companies. So if you find that useful, you could access it there. Thank you.